Hello and welcome back to the GemHawks YouTube channel. I hope you're having a beautiful day. For our free tutorial today on YouTube, we're going to be looking at a very achievable design. Now this is a double spiral pendant, super easy, and it's suitable for small cabs or even freeforms. So I have an 8mm labradorite here, which I'll show you on the board in a second. And that's been set with 2 gauges of wire. I have an 18mm bead that's been set without using the drill aperture, and I'm going to demonstrate today with a larger cabochon. This is a 32mm labradorite. I'll show you that on the board in a second when I can get the light to shine on it beautifully. Now you can use this on free forms, you can use this on perfectly round cabs, obviously because the spiral is a beautiful round form. It's perfect with round cabs or even little faceted stones like this tiny 8mm labradorite. Let's head down to the board, take a closer look at the designs, and then we'll make one together. So as I mentioned, this is an 8mm stone, which is quite wee. A lot of people find it rather daunting to set a gemstone of this size that doesn't have a drill aperture. So this is a faceted cabochon. It's flat on the back, faceted on the surface. No drill hole required. Now you can leave the central spiral much larger so you can see more of the gemstone. I've kind of gone to town on those spirals, but I'll do a slightly different variation for the large cab, which we'll be working with today, just so that you can see things a little bit more clearly. The technique will be exactly the same. So this is a black agate, it's 18mm faceted bead. I haven't used the drill hole, and that is in a beautiful dyed agate. So let's just pop that down out of the way and take a look at the stone we're going to be working with to demonstrate today. It's a very flashy labradorite. As ever with lab, sometimes it looks dark, sometimes it looks amazing. This is a 32mm cabochon, gently domed, flat on the back, and the wire I'm going to be working with is raw copper today, just because I like how it begins to tarnish. This piece was made a few days ago and it's ever so slightly darker. This piece was made a few minutes ago and it's still quite pink. You can choose to pop this in a liver of sulphur. Obviously do check that the stone you're using is safe. Most of the time labradorite doesn't react to liver of sulphur, but do a little bit of a spot test if you have a very flashy piece or a very precious piece. Obviously you can use glass instead. The main wire I'm going to be using today is quite a strong one. It's 1.25mm, equivalent to 16 gauge, and I have a 15-inch length, and that's just because I'm working with quite a large cabochon. The tiny labradorite that's 8mm used an 8-inch length, and that used around about a 12-inch length for that 18mm bead. We'll also be adding in some 0.4mm wire, and we'll be using around about 18 inches or so of that later on. Do start off by making sure both of those ends are cut nice and flush, and that you have added some warmth into that wire by just smoothing along with thumb and forefinger. You'll find that the wire operates a little bit better for you if you just take the time to do this a few strokes through, and it will make all the difference in the world. I'm then going to grab my basic round nose pliers and start by making a circular form. What I tend to do with starting off spirals is to go almost all the way around a circle, and then just push that cut end into the wire, and in that way you can control whether you get a circular section in the middle. Sometimes it's difficult and you end up with a bit of an oval, but feel free to start again if you need to. So I've started off with a rounded form. I'm then going to bring the wire around in a spiral. Now the spirals don't have to be the same on the front and the back. They can be slightly more closed up on one side, slightly more open on the other side, dependent on how you feel on the day as to which face you could wear that. Even with the little faceted cab I have here, it's faceted on one side and flat on the back. Because it's labradorite, there's still beautiful flash, so I would wear it that way some days, and the other way other days. So you can vary the sizes of the spirals that you use. I'm going to make this one quite open quite quickly. Normally if you're working with a teeny tiny gem, you'll need to make sure that there's enough wire around the outer margins to ensure it doesn't escape from the project. So I'm going to bring this around and around and around, and I'm going to keep going until it's just a little bit larger than the actual gemstone. Now, once you get past a certain stage, you might prefer to use your fingers to create that spiral. If that doesn't sit right, do feel free to grab those pliers and just make any little manual adjustments to make sure that that sits properly. When you start getting towards the correct size for your project, and what I might do is just open that out manually, because I don't want too much over the face of my gem. What we're looking to do is to finish with a pass of wire around the outside of that gemstone, or whatever bead or cabochon you've chosen to work with. I love to work with natural gemstones. Labradorite, this piece is untreated. That colour is completely natural. Isn't that fabulous? So continue forming around until you've got just ever so slightly larger, as you can see here, than the gem itself. And then you'll need to bring the wire back to touch that previous pass of wire, that previous arc. So let's just cross that over so it touches. That looks like it goes around the outside and there's a little bit of space to boot. So just play with that until you're happy with the shape. You'll need to be delighted with it. That looks good to me. And then at the point where the wire touches the preceding piece of that spiral, we're going to draw that away at a right angle. Now, do take time to make sure that you're happy with this form and that you get a nice upright. So I'm going to take a few moments just to ensure that I'm delighted with how that sits. As with all wirework projects, the more time you put into it, the more perfect and beautiful it will be at the end. So do take that time just to make sure that you're happy, that there's an even space all the way around the edge of the cabochon or the bead, whatever it is you're using, and that last section of wire. Let's head back down to the board and we'll move on to the next step. So I've taken a couple of minutes of just shaping and refining, and then I've hammered the main frame section, but I've avoided hammering past that angle change. And the way I've got this to kind of form fit my cabochon is just to keep popping that over the top. Now, one thing I will say, with machined parts you can get very round perfect designs, but with hand carved gemstones it's often not 100% exactly round, which is all good because the beauty of the gemstone more than makes up for that. So let's now bring that wire back up to the top. Now, because I've done quite a lot of hammering down here, it's got quite a nice shine on it because I've given it a bit of a polish, we will need to re-warm just up at the top. So I'm going to put a little bit of heat in here, and I'm going to bring that wire forwards about 4 or 5 mil up from that angle change to create a right angle-ish bend at the front. I'm then going to use my chosen round form to make a nice simplistic hanging loop. So the easiest bail that you can do is just a wrapped loop up at the top. So once I've got that tied around once, I'll just centralise to make sure that that sits exactly where I want it to. Draw that wire around the little bit of neckline, and we're looking to end up with that tail of wire moving across in the same direction as the attached wire on that spiral. So again, I've work hardened this far more than I need to, just by hammering and twisting. So make sure that you're happy with your hanging loop, or your bail if you prefer. Bring that wire all the way over again so it moves in the same direction as the spiral, and then just give that a bit of a warm through. Now, the spirals don't have to be the same size or dimension on front and back. Part of the charm of the design is it's a two-faced design. Let's just have a look at the rear side of that cabochon. If I can get it to show you in the light, I will photograph it at the end of the tutorial on the outro screen. You can see it's really beautiful, flashy labradorite on both sides. So I would wear it in both directions. So let's start spiraling again on this secondary piece of sticky outy wire. So that is quite tough and tense, partly because of the twisting, partly because of that hammering. So let's start off again with the round nose pliers, bring that all the way around. And then you can switch to your flat facing pliers if you prefer, just to get that first little bit as rounded as possible. So we're just going to draw that around and around, and bring it over the face of your design. Now you will need to get that to be large quickly, so it might not work out exactly the same, and I'm thinking that 15 inches of wire for a very large cab, probably just not quite enough. So I'm going to work as best as I can with the wire that I have available. And if you are going to use a very large cabochon, perhaps use a slightly longer piece of wire. Full disclosure moment, didn't have quite enough wire to make enough spiral on the front, and that's because I underestimated how much wire my 32mm cabochon required. I set aside around about 15 inches, and for that piece I probably should have used about 22 to 24 inches. So I'm going to turn that into something else later. I'll show you that on the outro photo as well, in case it happens to you. You don't want to be wasting that wire. So I've quickly recreated that spiral. That's been hammered. I've created the loop exactly as we did in the video just a second ago, and I'll now show you how to create the second side. So there's probably around about 10 to 12 inches of wire available to me. I've done exactly the same as I showed you on the preceding video. Just take a moment to make sure that you're still happy with everything lining up. So let's grab those round nose pliers. Tricky little things have gone off. And again, just make sure that this wire is nice and warm and ready to work for you. And what we're going to do is start spiraling exactly the same direction as we have on the other piece. So this means that my wire will need to tilt towards the frame that we're working on. So let's start off with a circular form on that round plier. Switching over to your bent chain nose or any flat pliers that you prefer, and we'll start moving this around. And I think on this side we'll have slightly more spiraling, so you can pick, once you've got those double spirals all in position, which side you want to go on which face of your cab or your bead or whatever it is you're using. This is a nice design to set a coin as well. In some countries, if the coin that you're looking to work with as a jeweller is still legal tender, you may not be legally able to deface it by drilling through it or bending it. So with currency that is no longer in use, the law is very much different. But if it's still a legal tender, then you may not be able to kind of do too much to it. So a setting like this is perfect because it doesn't actually impact the cabochon or whatever it is you're setting. So I'm just going to continue spiraling until this fills up the gap. 12 inches of wire might be a little bit much, and I don't want you to get bored watching. So from the sublime to the ridiculous, not enough wire to far too much wire, but I'm going to run with it. And I just wanted to show you how you would just get that to sit as neatly as possible. You can use the straight edges of your chain nose pliers to refine a spiral form until it sits exactly how you want it to. So this is something that I don't often show on the videos because it's one of those take your time, make it fit moments. But just in case you wanted to see how to make it fit, what we're looking to do, you can lift that slightly if you need to, is get that spiral nice and straight so that all of the wires sit one inside the other. So you can do this just by a little bit of tilting until that sits down and fits around the other side of the frame. So again, do take your time. I know it's boring, I know I say it a lot, but just make sure that those two frames really beautifully line up together. So let's just give that a little bit of a tweak. And again, you can use flat pliers to create beautiful spirals. You could use tool dipped pliers if you prefer not to mark your wire. So I think what I'm going to do in the end is use the very, very many spirals on the flat side of my cabochon, and then the hammered, not very many spirals on the front, because I think that will look really, really pretty. So let's just pop that down for a second. I will take a moment just to make sure that I'm happy with all of these little tiny sections of wire. I just want it to be as perfect as possible. So do take your time and then start getting those two as flat to each other as possible. So I've made sure that the outer edge of my second spiral matches up with the outer edge of my first spiral. You could, if you wanted to, draw this away by just pulling here very, very softly, and you could hammer that slightly, or you could nom it with some flat facing pliers. I'm going to leave it soft and round because I quite like the juxtaposition of having one side hammered with that very high shine of the flattened wire, and then the other side which will turn darker over wear with that raw copper. So let's pop that down out of the way. What I'm going to do is now cut myself around about 18 or so inches of that finer wire. I'm using 0.4mm or 26 gauge. You could use 0.5 or 24 gauge. And what we're going to do is start by hooking on. And I'm going to choose the point at which the first frame, the one in this instance which is hammered, where it leaves that coiled wrapped loop up at the top. And I'm going to wrap on about 3 times. So let's just hook over the top, bend that wire around. I'm using about 1/2 inch, which will probably end up being 3.5 to 4 wraps. And I'm just going to get that really snug around that hammered wire. Let's make sure that those coils are nice and tight, and ideally that they end inside the frame. 4 visible wraps. Give it a tiny squish to tighten it up before you push that all the way around to the top of the design. So just push until it gets as close as you can get it. Once that is in position, I'm going to slide the chosen face of the cab into the chosen position. And then what we're going to do is make sure that the finer gauge wire is coming off. Take a look at where it's coming from. So on the front frame, the hammered frame, bring that slightly closer to you, the wire is coming from underneath, so I'm going to take it over the top of the other frame, the second frame, and I'm just going to circle 1 time around that second frame, so pushing the tail of the wire up, holding it in position and drawing that round until it's neat and tidy. I'm then going to draw that down over the rear frame. So if you are going in the opposite direction, it doesn't matter, we're just going to alternate. So to begin with, it's really easy just to slide that wire underneath so that we're hooking 1 time around that rear frame. Let's get the light shining on that wire and draw it back in the opposite direction. So all we're going to do is a little zigzag between the frame and the front coil to the frame and the back coil. Now on this side, you can see we've got 2 frames. Let me show you on the teeny tiny one, actually, that's a much better example. So we're going to be wrapping between the 2 frames and either the front or the back. So we're going to zigzag one way and then the other. So I've captured the outer spiral of the rear frame now. And if I just move this around slowly, I'm going to take the tail of the wire, because the fine wire is coming off the top of the back frame, push it down underneath the outside of that back frame. And I'm going to wrap that all the way around once. So again, I'm just going to hook it through exactly the same position. This is the outermost wire of the rear spiral, or the rear frame. Pull that all the way through and get that nice and neat and tidy. Then what we're going to do is to draw that over the top of the rearmost frame. This is the hammered side now. And we're going to circle around that. So you can post the tail of the wire out. Pull that all the way around so that it circles all the way around that rear frame. And because I'm now coming off the top of the rear frame, I'm going to take it underneath the spiral on the rear frame. Draw that all the way down, tighten those wires up. If you want to do that with your pliers, it's just a little munch like so. And then a diagonal line. So you can actually let that go if you want to, but I think it's easier to see if it's in there. So we're just going to hook once around that spiral, bring the tail of wire, because it's on the top of the spiral, underneath that first frame that we're coming to, which is the rear, the hammered frame. And we're going to circle around that once. Love working with long tails of wire, all the way around 1 time. So we're connecting the spiral to the frame, which is what stops your bead or your cabochon or whatever it is you're working with, stops it escaping. So let's take that through for a second time. Around that rear hammered frame. Kinked my wire slightly. I'm not going to let it worry me, just pull that through. Tighten up that weave. Now what we're going to do is to tie the rear frame to the front frame. So because that wire is coming underneath the rear frame, I'm going to take it over the top of the rear frame. I beg your pardon, this is the front frame and this is the rear frame, the unhammered one. So let's pinch that tightly, take the wire all the way around, so we're doubling on the 2 frames. Control that wire, bring it into position over the top. And then I'm just going to allow that to snake all the way around again, because it's easy access in this direction. If you don't have access, you can simply post the end of the wire under. So we're hooking one time onto that rear spiral. Let's get that into the light. Wire's coming over the top of the rear spiral, so take the tip down underneath that rear spiral's outer edge or outer frame. Hold that into position, and we're doing quite a nice lazy little diagonal zigzag. So we'll circle all the way around that rear frame, the unhammered frame, pull that tightly into position, and then because the wire is coming underneath that rear unhammered frame, I'm going to take it over the top and around the front hammered frame and just allow that to pull together tightly before you then take the wire to the spiral, and you're going to continue all the way around from point to point. So we're not only tying the two frame sections together, we're also adding a diagonal piece of wire, and I'll just show you how easy it is to just allow that to just go under the spiral, pop the stone back in, and it will just slide out for the time being. And this is why we're tying it in, to keep it there forever. And again, you can see that the wire comes over the top of that front hammered inner spiral. So you could push the leading edge through if that's easier for you. And we'll circle all the way around that hammered frame. And we will continue all the way around. So I'll probably go again just there. Push the tail through if you don't want to take the leading edge. Just control that wire. I've got a couple of wraps on that front hammered frame. So we'll then connect it from underneath to over the top, around here twice, and then a single pass of wire into that spiral, back again, double wraps here, into the spiral, back again, and so on and so forth all the way around. So I've zigzagged all the way around, rotating between each of those two frames and then the first spiral I meet. I've just left the tail of wire on because I want to show you how to finish off. So you can see with a minimal spiral on the front, we're able to see all of that beautiful glow. You could go for contrasting wire colours, of course, but all we're doing is kind of hooking around that spiral before we wind those two frame sections together. I've got a bit of a tail of wire here, and I'm just coming off the front frame, the hammered frame, over the top and then underneath that last bit of the rear frame, the non-hammered frame. So all I would do is just poke that wire up through, and you might need to just put a little bit of a hook on the end. So what I tend to do is turn the end over, make it into a little bit of a hook, and that will help me gain access, draw that all the way through, and then I'll finish off with however many stitches or rotations I started with. So there were about 3 on that first little bit, so I'll do 3 on the rear little bit before I cut away and tuck the end down inside the back here. You can see the difference. I'll do that in just a second, but you can see the difference that having a lot of spiral makes to having a little bit of spiral. Kind of reminds me of an ammonite in a way. So you can go somewhere between the two of those, but do take time to make your spirals perfect, because I can already see that that's not quite perfect, and I might need to just pull that away and get it a little bit more spirally before I'm happy with it. So again, take your time as you work through, and you'll end up with a piece that you can be proud of. So overall, I'm actually really happy with my little double spiral pendant there. That's the front with that hammered face, and there's the rear with the lots and lots of spiraling on there. I've just taken a toffee hammer and a mini block to add a little bit of strength to that coil on the bail, and I will be absolutely delighted to wear this piece either way around, because let's face it, I love labradorite. I hope that you're enjoying the content here on the Gemhawks YouTube channel. Don't forget to like, subscribe and share the videos. Have yourself the most beautiful day, and I'll see you very soon. Bye for now.